Hello beautifuls. Today's video is one that I have been asked for the longest of times, and I actually wanted to do this on my my mum. However, obviously with everything that's happened and the pandemic and so on, and my mum being unwell, it just hasn't happened. However, I decided I was going to do this on myself because I'm about to turn 35. And in the last 6 to 8 months, my skin has taken a dramatic turn. We all have it. I'm sure most of you will remember that day that you woke up and thought, when did my skin completely change? When did my makeup routine that I have done all of these years suddenly not work for me? When did that happen? Well, I am there with you. This video is going to be applying base makeup for mature skin. You know, the fine lines that are no longer fine, they're getting deeper and deeper. The foundation not sitting right, the foundation and products creasing, all of these things, pores looking stretched out, skin type completely changing from super oily to dry and dehydrated. Like, I get it. I get it. However, this does not mean you need to give up wearing makeup. We just need to make a few little tweaks. And I'm going to show you them now. Okay, first thing is first. For more mature skin, skin prep is so important. When I was in my 20s, I could get away with using absolutely no skincare routine. No specific products, nothing before I would apply my makeup, not even a lick of moisturizer. And it would look great. It did my skin no good for this point in my life. However, it still looked great at the time. That is no longer the case. It takes work and prep to get your skin in a good position for applying makeup. One of the first things is our wrinkles, fine lines and wrinkles. As I mentioned, they start to get deeper and deeper. However, a lot of that can be due to dehydration. And I don't mean dry skin, okay? You can have dehydrated skin and have oily skin. Okay, so you can have oily skin, but your skin can still be dehydrated because dehydration is caused by water that is retained by the skin, not oils. When your skin is dehydrated, it has no moisture behind it, therefore it loses its plumpness and your fine lines and wrinkles will appear deeper because your skin starts to sink back more. When we hydrate the skin, it plumps it out, which in turn fills out some of those wrinkles and those fine lines. It starts to plump the area around it up again, so it pushes it back out rather than allowing it to dip in. So hydration. So I would definitely recommend getting yourself a serum that contains hyaluronic acid and make sure you're applying it to damp skin. Hyaluronic acid works by attaching itself to water particles. And by attaching itself, that water particle allows the hyaluronic acid to grow and grow and grow. So water and hyaluronic acid work together to become a plumping and hydrating agent. And then to lock that moisture in place, because otherwise it will all start to evaporate, you want to make sure you're applying a good moisturizer on top. Okay, so that's skin prep out the way. So pores. Not everybody will have this, but some people will. I have always had oily skin. Often if you've had oily skin throughout your life, then your pores will be more enlarged because that's how the oil comes out of your skin, is through your pores. So they kind of go hand in hand. If you had oilier skin, then you're going to have more enlarged pores. What happens as we get older and we lose some of that plumpness that we were just talking about is the skin around the pores loses a lot of its elasticity. So those pores can start to look stretched out in areas like this, where we lose some of that skin's elasticity. So they'll often look more enlarged. So again, this is why hydrating the skin and helping it to plump back out again is super important. But you can also use pore minimizing primer. Now, I want to have a disclaimer here. Pore minimizing primer isn't pore erasing primer. Okay, it's not going to completely eradicate your pores. It's just not, especially when they are more enlarged. It is minimizing. So it will help to blur them a little bit, make them appear less noticeable. Okay, so we want to make sure everybody's expectations are set here. We're not going to completely eradicate the pores themselves. We're just going to make them appear less noticeable. So I'm taking a pore minimizing primer. I'm using the Smashbox Photo Finish Minimize Pores Primer, and I'm just going to apply it to where I have my enlarged pores. So that is each side of my nose here. I have a little bit on my forehead and some on my chin. And I'm just going to start to rub it in. I'm just using really small circular motions to rub this in. And when I get to here where they're the most sort of stretched out and enlarged, I'm just going to press that into the skin because I want it to press into the surface layer of those pores to help sort of fill it in. Okay, the next thing is I personally would recommend, if you can, I know it's a bit of an inconvenience, you know, we've done our routine the way we've done it all of these years, why do we want to change now? However, I would recommend personally, if you're going to be applying eye makeup, to apply it first. Sounds weird, I know, but the reason for this is when we have fine lines and wrinkles that often crease, you know, our makeup creases into, when we apply our foundation first and our base products first, and then we apply our eye makeup, we pull some crazy faces, and there's just no way of avoiding it. So for instance, if we're doing our mascara, we do this where we're screwing our forehead up, stretching our eyes out, and then blinking like this. You see all of these lines here that we are kind of exaggerating. And what happens is that foundation and whatever products we've just applied to the skin, they are still slightly damp. They haven't had time to completely set. You know, it takes a good while for them to completely set in place. So while we are doing this, we are scrunching that makeup up and kind of molding it into these shapes and lines. So what happens is as the skin moves back away, that makeup separates, making these lines look much more exaggerated. They look more like a crater than, you know, a fine line. So I personally would recommend doing your eye makeup first if you can. Okay, next thing is eyeshadow primer. So when we get to a certain age, we want to make sure we apply an eyeshadow primer if we possibly can. The reason for that is because otherwise any foundation and things that we've put on our eyelids are likely to crease. Our eyelids often hold more moisture than any of the other areas of our face. Those oils will keep that foundation wet and it will allow it to pool or crease into our fine lines. Eyelids are often more crepey as we get older, so there's more little tiny fine lines there and they will become exaggerated. So by applying a eyeshadow primer, it will help eyeshadows and things to stick in place, but it also will also help to prevent those oils from coming through and ruining your makeup. So I just used the MAC Pro Longwear Paint Pot, which is classed as an eyeshadow primer, but any eyeshadow primer will do. Okay, also I forgot to mention this part in skin prep. So as we mature, the skin around our eyes especially become more and more dry and dehydrated, and they will get more and more crepey here. The skin under our eyes is very different to the skin on our face. So you could have very oily, very hydrated skin on your face. However, your under eye area here will be very dry and dehydrated. That's because the skin here is much thinner than the skin on your face. There's less fat and collagen to plump out your under eye area. So if you apply your makeup and you notice that under here looks very dry, crepey, wrinkly, and just very sort of dehydrated, then really again this comes down to two factors. The main one is skin prep. Makeup can only do so much. If the condition of your skin underneath is not in good condition, makeup can't mask that. Makeup will sit directly on top of that. So this is where you want to start using your under eye creams, especially at night. Sometimes eye creams can be a little bit too thick, so you may feel like it's too thick to sit under your makeup. Then as a minimum, I would definitely recommend making sure you take a moisturizer, something that is hydrating, or your serum, and applying extra to your under eye area. So for instance, I use a serum and I will put a little bit extra under my eye area, and I will also take my primer and moisturizer, which is a 2-in-1, and I will apply a couple of pumps to my fingers, and I will concentrate that on my under eye area and let that soak in while I'm doing my eye makeup. So by the time I come to apply my base makeup, this is really soaked in and has helped to plump out and hydrate that skin. Again, products that contain hyaluronic acid, hydrating products. For instance, this one here, it moisturizes with hyaluronic acid. So it's helping to plump that area back out and really moisturize. If you are using a very mattifying, drying foundation for the rest of your face, then I would avoid putting it on this under eye area if possible, and instead use a more hydrating concealer. Okay, next step, color correct. If you notice that your makeup really creases and is really exaggerated in your fine lines and wrinkles around your eye area, then you want to go with less product. So if you have dark under eye circles that your foundation or concealer on its own just isn't covering, then I would recommend not applying foundation to your under eye area. Apply it everywhere and I would recommend color correcting first. So a color corrector is actually going to cancel out that dark color. I've done lots of videos on color correcting in the past. I will put a link to the video so you can see what colors to use on you to cancel out your darkness. But I'm going to take this yellow color corrector for me, and I'm going to just place a tiny amount, that's all, on the inner corner. Again, with more mature skin, we want to use as little product as possible. Okay, the less product we use, the better in this under eye area. Okay, now this next step for blending this out is a little bit different to what I usually talk about. If you struggle with your under eye area, with it really creasing and exaggerating those fine lines and wrinkles, then again, you want to use as little product as possible. So I would recommend blending this out with a sponge. The reason for that, as I've mentioned in a lot of my videos, sponges actually absorb product. So what it's going to do is absorb a lot of that product and leave you with a little bit of the pigmentation, meaning there isn't too much on your under eye area. So if that is you, then I would recommend using a sponge to blend this out. I would apply a tiny amount and blend it out and then have a look. You may look and think that it's not quite enough and you may need to apply a tiny amount more, and just do another little dab in this inner corner, because this is where most of the darkness is in this inner corner. And this area here, from here outwards, is where most of our fine lines and wrinkles are. So you want to concentrate it in the area that you specifically need it, rather than putting a thick layer all underneath here, because it's then going to crease. So take that sponge again and just bounce it along, and it will take off majority of the product and just leave you with a little bit of that pigmentation for your under eye area. This is why I do not recommend it for applying foundation, because it's designed to soak up product. So it's great for this, where we only want the tiniest amount of product left, but not for applying all of your foundation. And you want to try and go into those fine lines and wrinkles, so you have to stretch your skin out, and then do so. Okay, so that's helped to neutralize some of that color that was showing through. If you then feel like applying your foundation would give you enough coverage, then apply a very small amount of foundation to your under eye area. If you don't, then I would avoid applying foundation to your under eye area and apply a concealer there instead. Okay, now moving on to foundation. Again, as our skin matures, you want to make sure you're not applying too much product to your fine lines and wrinkles. So I'm going to take my kabuki brush and I'm going to apply my foundation, avoiding and put it onto the back of my hand so that I've got a bit more control over how much I'm applying. And I'm going to apply it to all of my face, and I'm going to avoid this under eye area, as you can see. I'm just building the coverage where I need it, so blemishes, redness, etc. But avoiding that under eye area. Okay, so I've applied it to everywhere but my under eye area. Now I'm going to go in with a tiny bit of concealer. Now I'm going to do the same as before. I'm going to put a tiny dot in this inner part of my eye. And I'm going to do a tiny bit just past where my fine lines are, just in an upward motion like this. This is going to help to give the illusion of a little bit of a lift in this area here. But without using a lot of product. Now again, if this is something that you struggle with, if you struggle with a lot of creasing here with your foundation or your concealers, etc., I would again recommend blending this out with a sponge. Again, it's going to take off any excess product and leave you with just a little bit of pigmentation there. So it's going to help to cover that darkness, but without leaving you with a lot of product that's going to crease. So I'm going to take my sponge again And I'm just going to press this into my under eye area and blend that in. And the same with my forehead. And again, you can do this with your foundation. If you find your foundation really creases in those areas, you can remove any of the excess foundation that you've put there by using a sponge. It will absorb that excess and leave you with just a little bit of pigmentation. So I'm just going to press over where I get creases in my forehead here. I'm going to blend this. I'm just going to press over my smile lines because they crease quite a lot. And this is just going to remove some of that product. And in my chin crease, this is actually an antibacterial sponge. So this sponge has been made with antibacterial properties, which is much safer for us to use because we're using them damp. It's less likely to cause problems with bacteria. These will be available on our website very, very shortly, and I'll make sure you are all informed of when they are available. Okay, and this next step is kind of critical. It's also a myth. There is a myth that using setting powder or powder on your face is going to make you look cakey and powdery. Now, yes, it can. However, it is a key step in stopping your makeup from creasing. The reason for that is the products that we have applied there are wet. When they are wet, they are movable. Even when they're drying and they're tacky, they are movable. They will stick together. As you press together a wrinkle by moving your face, they will press together, and then it will attach to each other, and then as it separates, it does this, and it leaves a big crater. Now, if we have fine lines and wrinkles, we don't want to apply too much powder. Too much powder will actually absorb some of the moisture in our skin and will dry it out further. So we want to use the tiniest amount on top. If you want to make sure you're not applying too much, then I would recommend using a pressed setting powder because it won't allow you to pick up as much as a loose setting powder will. You want to take your setting brush, press it into that product, tap off the excess. I make sure I tap off all of the excess. There's only a tiny amount left on the brush, and I just press over anywhere that I get creasing in my makeup. So I have this line across my forehead, often does it, my under eye area. Now, if you don't act quick enough with this and you've noticed that before you go to set your makeup, it has already creased, then I would recommend taking that sponge again and just pressing over that area. It's going to help to just smooth out those creasing, or if you're using a brush, then again, use the brush, press over that area. It's going to help to smooth out that creasing so that when you go in to set the makeup, you're not setting those creases in place. And then I'm just going to take the brush and just pressing. I'm not swiping, I'm not moving or dragging any of the product we put underneath, just in a really light pressing motion. And that's it, just a tiny amount. Just enough to set the makeup in place, but without making us look and feel powdery and dry. This is also good if you have enlarged pores and you use a foundation that is maybe dewy and you have large and stretched out pores like I do, then anything that is dewy or wet or shiny in texture will enhance those pores. So this is also a good step if you don't like that. Although I want to make a disclaimer here, there is nothing wrong with pores. Pores are very normal. Despite what social media and the magazines have us believe, they are very, very normal. It's part of being a human. But if you don't like them looking exaggerated, then take a little bit of that setting powder and just press over it, because that setting powder is going to mattify that area a little bit, which means it's not going to reflect light back and your pores will appear smaller. So a tiny amount of powder can be a really good thing if it's used in strategic areas that you need it, and it's a very small amount. I'm applying a little bit of contour. I'm going to do a whole video on contouring for more mature skin in a couple of weeks, so very soon. So I'm not going to go into that in this video, otherwise this is going to be far too long. And then finally, if you do not like that powdery look at all, or if you find that your matte foundation that you use because you have oily skin makes you look too powdery, then I would definitely recommend getting a setting spray. My personal favourite is from Smashbox. I think it's called Primer Water, but it's a primer and setting spray. It's very hydrating, and when you spray it on, it's going to attach to that powder and sort of melt it into the skin more. So it's going to take that powdery finish off and give you a more skin-like finish. And there you have it. That is base makeup for anybody over the age of 35. I hope you found this video useful and I hope you got some good tips and tricks from this. Let me know if you enjoyed this and I will try and do some more videos on mature makeup. Much love.